Nathan's not the only one who has a difficult time with my name, with my title. Usually our press and analyst relations folks have to repeat it several times when I talk to you folks. But thank you all for being here in Boulder. It's really great to have you here to be a part of what we're launching today. I was driving in to Omni today. I live about 15 minutes from here. I was thinking about how much things have changed since I've been at Spectra and since I started to do the outbound portion of marketing. I came in initially to do product management and took on the outbound part of marketing about 5 years ago or so. And my first press conference, I think we were introducing LTO5 maybe, I don't even remember now what it was, but introducing a new tape technology probably into our tape libraries. And John Twigo filmed my first press conference and was there at Storage Networking World. I think there was 7 people in the room. And it was a big deal for Spectra introducing the technology. It was a big deal for me personally. And then I look at how far we've come since then as an industry and the kinds of technology that we're offering, the types of people that we're drawing attention to the technology we're offering. Some of the greatest minds in the industry are in the room right now. And I'm really excited about it. So what I think is most notable about what's different, other than a fear we've all aged 5 or so years since that first press conference, is we're not just announcing the new tape technology. That as we looked at what do we want to bring out and into the market, and what really is going to make it worth all of you taking a few days out of your week to be here. And it's not a tape technology announcement. In fact, it's a lot more than just a storage hardware announcement. And looking at what's changed in the data center and how technology companies really need to do development these days, really you have to understand where the industry has gone. And like to think about what deep storage does is it enables the disruptive thinkers in an organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, why we want to really start be thinking about how can we put data into the hands of more of the individuals instead of holding it in the enterprise in a secure, difficult to access place. So looking back into history, what is disruptive technology? Probably a bunch of you have read books by Clayton Christensen. He first dubbed this term in a book that he released back in the 90s called Disruptive Technologies Catching the Wave. And what he was talking about is pretty straightforward, that the concept of where big companies, very large organizations tend to miss the mark or make it difficult to have that kind of exponential growth curve that you're seeing, not just in Spectra, but in the companies that are growing rapidly worldwide right now, is they're very focused on historically where have they been successful. They're taking a look at their CRM data, their operational data, their sales history data, and looking at where were we successful last year, let's invest more this year. And that's worked well. Certainly you can't say large corporations that have been around for decades are doing the wrong thing. However, they're not the ones who are really growing right now. And so looking at what disruptive technology offers is it's not just looking at what worked in the past, but it's making it possible to be predictive about what will work in the future. I think a great example of this is back in the old Model T car when Henry Ford introduced the concept of being able to mass produce off a manufacturing line a lower cost, higher reliability, consistent vehicle for the industry. Probably at the time, people didn't realize that the car was going to replace the horse and buggy until the Model T came out and made it possible to put that in the hands of everyone, or more of the common people. So looking at that kind of concept of really it's the disruptive user and it's the innovators who can figure out what can you do next that's going to really change the paradigm of an industry that move technology forward and move business forward. So what is a disruptive user? I'd argue that this isn't really the technology that's disruptive, but it's the users that have been disruptive the last several years. That 10 years ago, what was interesting was how big of a network connection could be released in a product, how much capacity was on a storage medium, how many processors or what type of processors are in a server. Those were the things that we were talking about that was really interesting in driving our industry. Now we're talking about what can a user do. And if you think about who would have ever guessed what the impact would have been of putting a cell phone in the hands of nearly everyone in the world that has a camera on it, can take videos of live events worldwide, take photos of everything that's occurring on the street, in a building, everything in the world is now being recorded, then connected by a social media infrastructure. real-time reporting of every event in every culture, everywhere in the world. One revolution led to another, and there's a multitude of examples I could go through that I'm not going to cover today. But if you think about that, what I think we should really be looking at, and what you're going to see us focusing on today, is not just how we're storing data. That problem is pretty well solved. We have big storage systems. Many companies you all know very well have big storage systems. It's how are we using that data, and how are we making it accessible to these disruptive users. So let's take a look at what's the need for deep storage, really. Nate did a good job of defining this term. Howard Marks does have a company called Deep Storage, so he's going to get a lot of coverage of this terminology.
Not to mention royalties.
And so what is deep storage really, and what's the need for it? So IDC predicts that by 2020, the digital universe will hold 40 zettabytes of data. A lot of us have seen these kinds of numbers, but that's a 300x growth in data between 2005 and 2020. Just having a way to store that kind of content is really what tape storage systems have been about for the last decade. That's not what's really new here. What's really new here is when you start to think about the individual and how we give individuals access to that data. It's kind of hard to fathom, but there's a little over 5 terabytes of data out there for every man, woman, and child in the world. Every single one of us, if you think about that size of data set, there's 5 terabytes of data out there. The last year, as you can think about how data is being created, the majority of it was created by individuals, but still 80% of the data that's stored out there is held in the enterprise. And this is where I really see the paradigm shift coming, is as I go to conferences and we talk about standards, I was at a conference on big data a couple weeks ago that Addison Snell was on a panel about, and people were talking about individuals' rights and security of their data. There's a lot to be worked out there, but the fact is the enterprise can't control it anymore. The data is being created by users, it's in the hands of the users. An IT department who tries to control, you can only use local storage and company provided storage, you can't put anything on Dropbox, effectively can't control that. And if they do try to control it, they're really limiting the disruptive users in their organization and curtailing their growth. So when you think about just what is the need for deep storage, the deep storage is to not only be able to store all this data that's being utilized, but it's also about creating a new generation of technologies and architectures that are designed to economically extract value from the data and make it very easy to capture the data, do discovery about the data, and analysis about the data real time. So why keep all that data? You know, I think sometimes I go to these kinds of conferences and I put together marketing decks and I'm looking for the slide from ESG or Gartner or IDC or whoever it is on how big the data is how fast the data is growing. And that's really interesting that that's occurring. But there's also the part when you go talk to the end users that Nate was referencing, and they're really grappling with, yeah, my data is growing fast, but is that good? Should I really be keeping this? Is this really value add to my organization that I continue to keep it? And the value of keeping that data is going back to the concept of now it can be predictive. It's not just about what kind of storage technology can I put all that content on that I can put it in the closet and hopefully never have to touch it. It's about I want to use this data and I want my users to have access to it. So taking the IT staff and the restoration process out of the middle so that if you guys are looking at notes you took from a year ago and you want to get access to your content, you don't have to make a phone call to IT, have the data restored, moved up to storage you have access to. Those kinds of steps make it impossible to really leverage the data you have. So if you don't change the way data is being stored, you don't make it possible for it to be predictive because it's just too hard. So if you're going to keep your data, why not get benefit out of that data for your organization to be able to continue to move great ideas forward? So correlation is king. This is not a big data announcement as far as the folks who are thinking about big data in the analytics perspective. We absolutely do have ties into that industry that we're going to be talking about later today. But this is much bigger than just looking at how can we tie to analytics or to a certain package that may be well known in the analytics industry. It's really making it so any user, regardless if you're in the broadcast industry, the healthcare industry, the cloud storage industry, No matter what industry you're in, you can tie into your data to be able to use it for correlation around the kinds of questions you want to ask. But what's even more interesting, and Bob Cohn, who introduced the event today, was helping me put this presentation together, and he made an interesting comment. I have a degree in biology and chemistry, so not related to data storage or marketing at all. And when I used to do lab experiments, which I think all of us did, you went to the lab and you were told, make a hypothesis and then go prove it. And make sure you prove what you hypothesized or you get is, C or D. That's not real great. But that was really the way kind of experiments were done, is you took a bunch of smart people. When I was at IBM, I took notes in a think tank for a year when I was doing some other work for them, and had people come up with hypotheses, and then you'd go try to prove them. But the problem with that is you were limiting yourself to what each individual's human brain could come up with as something you might go try to prove. Now, with correlation and analytics, put our computers, all those processors that we make that are super fast sitting in our desktops, sitting in a supercomputer, and make all the data accessible to them. So you don't even have to know what questions to ask. You don't have to come up with a hypothesis, because it's going to give you the answers to the questions you don't even know to ask. A great example, I'm sure many of you have heard of this, but it just really kind of gives color to this discussion, is how Walmart uses predictive analytics. That when there's a hurricane coming, this is a great example. For other presentations, I have a bunch of these. I'm going to just do one for this presentation. But what Walmart has figured out is that when a hurricane is coming and there's news going on that a hurricane is on its way in the next couple of days, they sell an enormous number of Pop-Tarts. A lot more Pop-Tarts than they typically sell. Nobody at Walmart sat there and thought about, let's see if we're going to sell more Pop-Tarts when there's a hurricane coming. Nobody thought to ask that question. It just is. And what's even more interesting is we don't really care why it is. All Walmart knows is if you put the Pop-Tarts next to maybe some high margin stuff or further back in the store, maybe you can drive some other business as people go to get their Pop-Tarts. And that's a really good example of thinking about how running analytics and being able to be predictive is so valuable, and scales far beyond the human brain to be able to use all this data we're capturing and answer the questions we don't know to ask. So welcome to our world. You look at the data set sizes are inconceivable. For those of us who've been around in this industry for a short time, a long time, you look at hundreds of terabytes used to be unfathomable to most organizations. Now we talk about petabytes relatively casually. You hear Nathan up here talking about, oh, this customer with 20 petabytes, that customer with 120 petabytes. When I started at Spectra 9 years ago, a petabyte customer was unbelievable. I mean, we sent our whole executive team out there and brought them gifts. I mean, it was a really big deal. Now we talk about them somewhat casually. Of course, we highly value them, but they're becoming a lot more commonplace. And you look at the storage system that you guys saw last night, the T-Infinity, that can scale into the exabyte capacity. We've sold exabyte capacity T-Infinities to single organizations. I mean, that is a reality now. So things have really changed, and that's changed in the world of data storage. So what is deep storage really? Deep storage is extremely low cost, power efficient, dense storage that's designed for data that does not need immediate access. So if you think about the kinds of data that goes out onto it, clearly this is designed for, today, tape libraries. Spectra is a tape library company. We also have designed all of the deep storage technologies to take advantage of future media. If you think about the concept of the conference being called the Forever Data 2013, if you think about longevity of data, none of us, going back to what hypothesis do we have, we all may have guesses what the key leading storage media is going to be in 20 years. None of us know. It could be optical, it could be some kind of shingled media, it could be something we haven't heard of. So deep storage is designed to be low cost, power efficient, and dense. Right now, tape storage is the best medium for that. We've had that validated in more ways till Sunday, and as we do briefings later today, we'd be happy to talk about that. But there's more to it than that. So we've got these great tape storage systems that have the attributes physically of what tape storage media needs to be. But deep storage has to be accessed over open interfaces. This is the key to deep storage, is making it accessible to the user. That all that storage setting out today in our big petascale storage systems is very difficult for an individual to get access to. It's designed for computers with applications designed specifically for the purpose and the use to give access to them, to then give access to the user with maybe more steps involved. But deep storage, to really accomplish the vision, has to have open interfaces and has to be accessible over web protocols. And deep storage is stored as objects. I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit here, but if you think about how data is growing and the capacities that's growing at, there's limitations to file storage and file systems that need to be solved as well. So let's talk a little bit, I'm not going to go into a super technical discussion here, but it's more the concept of why object storage is necessary for deep storage. So if you think about what Nate went back to, that we started out as an industry as block storage. Block storage being you have to understand SCSI protocols, you have to have a way to group up a bunch of blocks into something larger that you can present to an application or a user. Then the industry started to move to file storage. NAS storage solutions are extremely popular for ease of use. Individual user can provision their own storage relatively easily. There's a lot of things about file storage that's very good. And we don't see that deep storage as a replacement. It's just when you start to look at customers that have needs growing beyond terabytes, well into the petabytes, and even starting to think about exabytes, that some other storage system is necessary. So one of the issues for very large data sets and finding your data long term when you put it out into a file storage system is that the file systems are nested. They were invented 30 years ago and accommodated the size of data sets people were using 30, 20, 10 years ago very, very well. There is overhead to the file system as far as the applications, as far as the processor utilization. You know, if you're running reads and writes simultaneously, you kind of have to share your performance, all the things that all of you probably know a lot about. But the bigger thing for deep storage is with the file system, you had to focus on the location instead of the content. If I want to go find the PowerPoint presentation I used from the last time we had a conference here in Boulder, I would have to go think about, okay, let's see, I stored it probably in my press conference folder and probably in something called 2011, you know, I would have to think about, or was it 2012 I did that conference? It's difficult to remember location. Instead, as you start to think about, I want to have access to a petabyte of data, that's humanly impossible, at least for most of us, to remember everything about the location. You just remember the content. Yeah, I spoke about that topic once. I want to go find everything I did about that particular topic. File systems were also really good for real-time sharing. They're great for editing. They're great for processing. File systems work really, really well for the vast majority of uses out there, and they continue to today. Where the innovation and evolution needs to move from innovative companies like Spectra right now is how do we scale beyond when you meet the limitation boundaries of a file system. Objects stores are flat versus hierarchical. So if you think about that last picture that had the tree over, the directory tree over on the left hand, one of the biggest differences of an object store is it's flat. So you can say, I'm going to make an object that has certain metadata around it, around the types of content that can be human created or computer generated. And then all those files that you have, uh-oh, my animations aren't working. Hang on. But you can guess that that file folder is going to fly over to that object bucket. Maybe. Whoop, whoop, Joe. Help. There it goes. I just had to click the button a few more times. I'm not just in marketing, I am a technology person too. I just click the button faster and eventually it does what I want. So the concept really is that instead of having to keep a hierarchical structure of all those different types of data content, knowing each of their location, all those different types of files which were up there flying into the box, the media files, the PowerPoint files, maybe some JPEGs of logos, all went into a single object bucket. It's not hierarchical, it's flat. Unlike in files, you don't have to keep track of, as a user, where those objects are. You just need to know, essentially, an HTTP address that addresses that object, and you don't even need to know what kind of storage it's sitting on. Each object has a unique object ID, and that's what makes that possible, is that storage may be, with today's announcements, it could be tape, it could be disk, it could be in the cloud, but all the user really needs to know is here's an HTTP address, and the content is associated with that. A great example of that this weekend, using this kind of technology, I wanted to take a look at the video that we kicked off the conference with that played at the very beginning. And the gentleman who was doing the design on that was at home, I was at my house, wanted to quickly see the video. Of course, it's an enormous file, way too big to email and open with file systems. You know, he just was able to send me over an object ID, and I was able to watch the video very easily. The other piece about an object that's really critical is the idea of you're not just storing physical location about your content, but the metadata associated with it. Metadata is absolutely key to deep storage and to predictive analytics around the data that you have. You can't rely on the human brain again to remember all the questions you want to ask. You have to have the metadata out there to search, to predictively look at, to answer the questions a year from now that maybe you didn't even think about I need to assign metadata to today. That metadata is one of the keys to not just object storage, but to deep storage. So kind of looking at the benefits of some of the things Nathan was talking about, cool things you get with deep storage. As he mentioned, you have RESTful interfaces. What that makes it possible to do is move bulk data in and out of storage very, very easily across the modern interfaces that the kids coming out of college know how to use. The issue for the tape industry is very real, that the folks who know how to manage tape are starting to retire. There's not a lot of classes at university that talk to how do you write block storage protocols to tape. So for our industry, it was an industry kind of crux that we were at. We had to figure out, finally the data sets have grown to the point of really tape makes an enormous amount of sense and nobody knows how to use it. So we could either go fund a bunch of university programs or we could modernize the infrastructure to use it the way users want to use it today, which is the direction that we're going. It's persistent. The really important thing there is people do want to keep their data for a really long time, no matter what industry it is. And IT guys hope that they can retire before they have to do a data migration because it's a nightmare. And all of you know that, those of you who have done a data migration, it is a nightmare, whether it's on disk or tape. Deep storage solves that problem, and it has to solve that problem because if we're going to continue to encourage keep this storage, we're going to make it affordable, but people go, well, it's obsoleted in 10 years and I don't know how to move it. We've got to solve that problem too. Deep storage is cost effective. It's a fraction of the cost of whatever traditional storage is out there today. This is a new invention. It's a new way to access the storage. And you can run the numbers just about any way, and you come up with certainly single figures and often double figures of savings that you're going to have as a percentage of the current storage solutions. It has to be cost efficient. It has to be space efficient. If you're going to keep content for a really long time, your data centers probably aren't growing. We all know power is being taxed, so it has to be efficient. It has to be able to be accessed by just the right people over time. And you also need to make sure that the content's there, that you've got this huge deep storage system that sounds great, and then 20 years from now you go in there and you realize, oh my gosh, I can't read anything in the system. That's a really bad problem too, that the storage system has to solve, and the intelligent software around the storage system. You can't depend on people to do these kinds of things. This has to be built into the software. And then it's easy to integrate and deploy. We can't have storage experts necessary to access this data. You certainly can't rely on tape experts. We want it to be something that anybody in this room, and when you come visit us tomorrow, we're going to be showing you this in our tech day, that any of you in this room could access the content in a deep storage system with relatively little at work. Nate's kid, Buck, who he was talking about earlier today, really could write a client and push his GoPro video out to a deep storage system realistically without any technology training. He's a pretty smart kid. So looking at what are the deep storage markets, I'm not going to spend very long on this. I'm going to hand this over to Granger, our EVP of Worldwide Sales. And what he's going to talk about is, clearly we've done a lot of work over the last several years on the technology and validating that this technology is necessary. And where we've started to see alpha customers, beta customers, those who are buying POCs for the solutions that we're starting to announce, hit these markets. It's not to say these are the only markets for deep storage, but these are the ones we've validated and have customers that we're working with actively right now, either as part of our advisory panel or part of our programs that have been testing and bringing this technology to market. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Brian Granger, who's going to talk about some of the intelligence in our storage systems that we're leveraging that's out there today. That's a key part of the technology that helps to make deep storage accessible. So with that, I'm Brian Granger, our EVP of Worldwide Sales.
Thanks, Molly. Thank you. Welcome. So 5 years ago was your first, I aged about 10 years over those last 5 years since your first press conference. You heard from, going straight to that.
Making people make builds in your slides.
Yeah. You heard Nathan talk about deep storage and how we define that. And Molly talked about how the data and how people are using that data. I want to take a step back and talk about Spectra Logic over the years and some of the core engineering philosophies that we've built into our tape products that we're going to move forward into some of the new products that you'll be hearing about today and also in the future. There's a few things out there. First off, the types of data always changes. As the industry has moved, the types of data, the way people use data, the way people access data, the way that they look at the data has changed year over year over the years. In fact, the storage mediums, if you think about it, there's tape, there's disk, there's flash, there's optical, there's lots of different mediums that'll be coming out over in the future. But the one area that just hasn't changed at all is the critical need that when you need the data, you can access it and it's reliable. I think we can all agree to that. So in that, one of those first slides that Nathan talked about, the R&D spend and the different products that we've come out with over the years, I would venture to say that we probably have been the most technologically advanced company in the tape industry. We've certainly been the leader in terms of promoting tape technology and designing features in new libraries during a time when the market slowed down somewhat with some of our competitors. And first and foremost, Nathan talked about encryption. We were the first company that came out with library-based encryption to our customers. Very easy, 1, 2, 3, 3 process, 1, 2, 3, and you're encrypting literally within 15 or 30 minutes of utilizing the software. Media lifecycle management, which I'm going to use a prop here. Media lifecycle management, or MLM, is where we've built features that actually track the physical piece of media in your library. And this could be a customer that has 50 slots, or the T-Finity you saw last night of over 50,000 slots. We have metrics that look at over 40 different attributes of this piece of media to ensure that the integrity of the piece of media is intact and that the film inside is intact. It manages how long it's been in life, how much data is being used on it, how many times it's been inserted into a drive, so on and so forth. And it reports back to the customer if this piece of media is in potential danger. We use a very simple stoplight. If it's green, everything's good. All 40 of those attributes check off, everything works fine. If it's yellow, we're indicating to the customer that there's a potential risk of this piece of media in your next scheduled maintenance or the next time that you have the ability to take that piece of media out, migrate the data off of this piece of media and put it on a new piece of media and put it back in. Or in the worst case scenario, it's red. And that's where we're indicating that there's a critical need to get that piece of media out, transfer your data before you lose it, put it on a new piece of media. That's really the substance of MLM. There's a lot more details that go beneath that we can talk individually if you'd like to learn about that. That's all wrapped around our certified media pack, which I just showed, that holds 10 pieces of media that comes with a lifetime warranty. And this is really key. Maybe not for somebody that has 20 slots or 50 slots or 100 slots. Let's think of these customers like out on the West Coast, one of our customer, NASA Ames. They have tens and tens of thousands of pieces of media. Okay, so having that no quibbles asked return, lifetime warranty when a piece of media goes bad, or even the thought that the piece of media might go bad, they can simply, through our service organization, exchange that. MLM is a good example. I bring up NASA Ames. This really saved their bacon one time. They were having some persistent issues in the library, and we were able through MLM to identify and isolate those pieces of media and what the cause was, and remove it out of their system and replace it with new pieces of media. We were able to do that in a fairly simple process. If you think about it, they didn't have the predictability of this piece of media, and it failed. To find the root problem would have taken, of tens and tens of thousands of pieces of media, would have taken an extremely long time, especially in man hours.
The cause was a bad drive, I assume?
That root cause was a bad drive. Actually, I think it might have been. So actually moving on to drives, the drive lifecycle management, which is fairly similar process. We obviously look at different attributes, but we take a look at the drive. Typically in our environments, a drive takes a long, slow, painful death. And there's lots of indicators in there. Read-write errors start to increase. The drive continues to get dirty and dirty if a customer is not cleaning it. So we've got lots of different ways to analyze the drive in the same fashion of MLM. So to predict when a drive potentially could go bad, or when it's time for service, when it's time just to get it out of the environment and replace it. And through our services organization, we still have the same ability to replace those drives as well. So last, but certainly not least, in terms of the storage lifecycle management, is data integrity verification, or DIV. This to me is probably the most important feature that we offer that will be very important in the deep storage market. Let's say my boss, the CEO, I'm the IT director, loses his email, and we need to rebuild his email. And we go to actually rebuild that email and the data's not there. You think I'm gonna last long? Probably not. The goal is making sure that the data is there when you need it, and it's also reliable. So we have a 3-step, we have a pre-scan, a quick scan, and a post-scan. Again, I'll get into all the technical jargon in separate sessions if you'd like. But basically, when the piece of media is being inserted into the archive or into the deep storage, it's scanned to check the validity of the data, and it is there. And then over time, and think about some of these assets. Nathan talked about some video assets that a branch of the government uses. Sometimes it's recorded and it's never looked at for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. You don't know what might have happened to that data over that course of time. So one of the key features is the post-scan, where we will periodically, go out when the library is not in a job mode and actually track that piece of media and verify that that data is still there. So whether you need your you need to retrieve data tomorrow or in 5 years, DIV is a very important feature that can ensure that your data is there.